Hello and welcome to a new episode of Cattitude. This episode is not just for translators, but also for project managers and clients, even maybe. As some of you may know, I'm from the game localization industry. And one of the characteristics of game projects is the fact that you often get lists of thousands of strings in random order that basically can appear anywhere in the game. You have no idea about the context. So, for example, a string or a segment, if you want to call it that way, saying save could, if it's a soccer game, refer both to an actually ball save by the keeper and to saving a file, both of which get very different translations in Dutch. So we need to know the exact context of this word. We need to know when it appears, how it appears, why it appears. Basically, we're in doubt. We cannot just assume things, so we have to ask the client. And I'm sure that game localization is not the only field this applies to. This applies to many other fields. So how do we solve this? Well, the old-fashioned way is that you actually use an Excel sheet or maybe a Google Doc sheet. And that sheet could look a bit like this. So, for example, there is a file name you have to fill in. The string could have an idea, but this could, for example, also be a paragraph number or a page number, depending on the kind of text you're working on. There could maybe be some extra context. There's the actual source text the question pertains to, and then there's, of course, the actual question. And if you have a question, you have to go from your CAT tool to Excel or Google Docs or whatever you're using for your query sheet, and you have to type all these questions one by one. And there's a lot of information that needs to be copied and pasted to and fro, because once your question is actually answered by the client, then you have to re-implement the client's answer back into your translation tool. So the whole process begins again, but then the other way around. This is a very painful process. It's very tedious. Everybody hates it, and still everybody does it because there's simply no other way. Until there was Cattitude. Because how does Cattitude handle this issue? Well, it goes a bit like this. This is a text we've translated last month for a client called Charlie Oscar, the coolest game developer in the world. And they're cool because they made a very cool game called Spire of Sorcery, which you all should check out at Steam because it's a great game. It's a kind of crossover between a board game and strategy game. And I'm sure you'll love it. So far, the product placement. This game is a game we're translating to 3 languages, namely Japanese and Korean and simplified Chinese for mainland China. Okay, so I'm currently pretending I'm the Japanese translator, and I'm translating this text from English to Japanese. And suppose I have questions about this text. For example, there is a sentence, but only 3 succeed in crossing the Great River. Well, one question I could have is, should I actually translate this literally to Japanese? Or should I just transcribe the name as Great River in Japanese? We already made a choice. We already decided to translate it as Kyodai Kasen in Japanese. This is a choice we already made, but for this purpose, we'll just assume we haven't made that choice yet, and we want to consult the client. So if I'm the translator, I only see this Q button here. So let's press this Q question button and fire my question. Do you want us to actually translate Great River to Japanese, or should we just transcribe it? That's a question I could ask about this. I press OK. What happens? Well, my question and my username immediately appear right below the segment. This makes sure that other translators, for example, the Chinese translator or the Korean translator, are not going to ask the same question about the same string. Something else that happens, and you already see this bar moving, is that an email will be fired to all project participants. And I can actually open this email, and there's a lot of information there. There's the date and time. There's my username. This is from English to Japanese. The project, the client franchise is Charlie Oscar Spire of Sorcery. This is the actual file name. This is the project directory. This is the segment ID. This is the first segment of this text. Not entirely true. The first segment is segment number 1. Segment number 0. And this segment is then actually number 1, but you get my drift. Where's my email software? There. Here's my actual question. Here's the source text. There may be a current translation and a current target. We'll just ignore current for now because it does not apply to this project. This is the current target translation. There's a string idea, and then there's some other information that we may or may not need. And all this information is copied automatically. There's no manual copying and pasting involved, which is really great. Good. So all translators are updated automatically. And for example, if they already have delivered their translation, they can check this mail to see if any changes may be needed afterwards. Because normally translators are actually expected to know to just keep checking the query sheet as long as the project is running several times a day, even if they have already delivered their project, which is very tedious. This makes sure this is not necessary. They get all the information they need in the email they receive, and then they can decide based on that email whether actual changes are necessary. If not, they can just ignore the whole thing. And if changes are needed, then they can actually fire up Cattitude and make the actual change. This is a time saver, really. Okay, suppose there is one other question we want to ask about the word mages, which occurs several times in this text. The spire's power cannot reach the imperial lands, but once the mages enter the wild lands, blah, blah, blah. What kind of mages are we talking about? I mean, we already made our decision, but this could actually influence the translation we want to use. So let's just pretend we're not sure we want to know this. So I'm going to ask a question about this. What kind of mages are we talking about? Are they, for example, offensive or defensive? This may make a difference. I fire this question. My question appears immediately. And sooner or later, you'll also see the email arrive, which contains this actual information, which is sent to all project participants. Okay, so I have fired my questions. There is the email in question. And that's an entirely different program to listen to music, which is great, but not something we're going to do today. So let's just close this. And here is the question I asked about what kind of mages are we talking about? There you go. Good. So now I pretend to be the client or the project manager who's going to answer all these questions. Well, one way to answer them, would be to just manually scroll through the entire project until I actually see a question. But there's a very nifty feature in Cattitude called filters, which we can use to filter unanswered questions. So let's use that. Q&A currently off. I press it once. And now it says Q&A question. So now we only see unanswered questions. There are 3 questions that have not been answered. This is an actually question that was asked during the project, and this was solved later. There was no need for an answer anymore, so it just kept stuck there. And these are the 2 questions I just entered. So I'm the client, and I'm going to answer these questions. Please translate it. Please translate the name Great River. Okay, that's my answer. And the answers are in italics. Good, and they appear immediately below said segment. The fact that the questions, both the questions and the answers, appear right below the segment you're working on. This is really great, because what often happens when you use query sheets is that multiple translators will lose overview and actually start asking the same questions about the same segments, which is very annoying for both the project manager and the client. Because the questions and answers are presented in this way, this is never going to happen in Cattitude. Also, when you use another translation tool, it's often pretty hard to find any questions asked about the segments in question, if you can actually ask them in said tool. I know that one tool requires you to actually hover your mouse over a little cloud right beside each segment, which is, it basically creates an extra threshold. And people will forget, they will forget to hover their mouse to see if there are any questions. This is also very tedious if you have to hover your mouse every single time in every single segment. You want to see this information. This information has to be presented right below, above, to the left, to the right of the segment you're working on. It's not something you should actually need to invoke. So this is why all questions and all answers, also the string ideas, as you may have noticed, are presented directly below the segment you're working on. Here, there's an actual new email with the actual answer from the client. So once more, all project participants get an update, get an automatic update. And based on this update, they can actually decide to implement the answer yes or no. Okay, one more example. Because there is actually one more filter in Cattitude, which is called questions answers. And this filters for all questions that have actually been answered. There's only one of them. You actually want us to translate Great River to Japanese? Please translate it. This, so far, is the only question that has been answered. Press the filter one more time. I see all segments. Press it one more time, and I only see unanswered questions. We'll just ignore this one, the lower one. I want to show one more thing. What kind of mages are we talking about? Are they offensive or defensive? They're really cool mages. Because they can actually use fireballs. Offensive. Okay, good. Implemented. And to back up my point, to back up my answer, I can also upload a picture there's the email that was once more sent to all project participants. When I press the U button, or basically hover my mouse above the U button, I can choose a file and I can upload this file like this. When I now press F5 to renew everything, there should be, of course, this question has now been answered, so I have to use the answered questions filter. There is now a new link, screenshot 3, it says. 3 is a code used internally. I can just press this and now I get a new screen. Wow, lo and behold, there is actual context information for this string. So I can also upload screenshots. And this is a completely different email from my local newspaper, which is absolutely not related to Cattitude. So let me just close down my email software because I already made my point. And this is how it works. I think this is a lot more efficient than using query sheets that have to be sent to and fro all the time, containing multiple questions from the same translators about the same segments. These are all things you want to avoid. You want to see this information. You want to have it readily available below each segment while you're translating. I hope you liked this video and I hope to see you next time. Meanwhile, happy translating. Goodbye.